Good day, I'm Anne Dolenchuk and you're watching Anne on Influence. In today's episode, we're in conversation with Dr. Doug Mattheus and Gordon Muller, aka the Doc and the Guru, both acclaimed marketing professionals. They've been in the industry for decades and they share their knowledge and insight and experience with us. This is a two-parter episode, so tune in the next couple of weeks to see episode 2. But we covered so many topics and we had so much fun. In this episode, episode 1, we have a look at how psychology is now part of advertising and marketing, especially behavioral sciences. We chat about the importance of making sure that your campaign really is aligned with your target market and it's not just you and your team that really loves the idea. And the importance of knowing how to interpret data so that your campaigns can be more impactful. And of course, we also talk about the stars in the movies that influenced the Doc and the Guru. Before we get into this episode, just a huge thank you to our sponsors, The Salt, the first to market nano influencer agency in South Africa, and also part of SA's #1 influencer marketing group, Infinity. Enjoy.
So these days, when it comes to digital marketing, the magic is often found in getting the right person to create and post content. This is where the Salt steps in. We generate and grow a dynamic database of real influencers, real people with real relationships within their highly engaged online communities. We know our people and we know what excites them, and that allows us to really pinpoint the right influencers for your campaign. Welcome, Doc. Welcome, Gordon. Thank you so much for making time to be on my podcast today. Guys, if you're not aware yet, Doc and Gordon have got their own podcast called The Doc and the Guru. It's all about marketing, super insightful. So I give it a thumbs up. So please go subscribe and listen to that one as well. So Doc and Gordon, you guys have been in the marketing industry for a very long time, which tells me you obviously really enjoy what you do. So that really made me wonder, really, why are you so passionate about marketing? And let's start with Doc. Can you answer that question?
Well, firstly, thanks, Anne, for having us on the show. It's nice for Gordon and I to be on the other side of the camera, so to speak, or other side of the microphone. So that's great. I think for me, it's been, I guess, even as a kid, I was always drawn to brands. And so, I'd see something, whether it's a car brand or, ironically, in many cases, a sporting brand. In other words, I'd see a pair of sneakers at a distance, and I'd know the not only the type, but the model name or the model number, and so on. So I was always aware of logos, and then as a kid, you also collect certain things along the way. So Coca-Cola, for argument's sake, would have the underliner, and it would be like a treasure island, and so you get drawn into the collection. And for me, even as an adult, the big attraction was the multifaceted nature of marketing. So in other words, it's not just marketing communications. Obviously, that's the overt part, the tip of the iceberg that people see. But it's all the thinking and the planning that goes behind it, specifically when you're running a big campaign. And I've had the benefit and privilege of running some really big integrated campaigns that have so many aspects. And it's important to not only bring them together, but interesting to see how you bring it together. And the end result then is often a piece of communication that would lead to a purchase or a sale or so on. So yeah, a long way around, but that's it was ever since I was a kid. I was always attracted to, I think, the visual part of marketing, and then later on found out that there were other things that led to the visual part.
Yeah, for me, it's
so many things.
Slightly different approach. I mean, I studied psychology and English at university, and there was a spectacular lack of thought about the application of poetry as a way of earning a living. So I came into it rather through the advertising route. I was spectacularly ill-informed about marketing as a discipline. It was only as I grew into the advertising that I began to understand where the application is. So for me, it was just a chance to behave badly and exercise a poetic view of life, and people seemed to give me money for it. So it was really rather enjoyable. But I mean, I think it's come a long way since then. And ironically, what I thought was the poetic lifestyle has become more secondary to the psychology aspect of it, because where we're going in media now is behavioral science and looking at attitudinal engagement rather than the number of people who look, who listen, who engage, whatever. So yeah, it's just an eclectic lifestyle which has really appealed to me and kept me interested for 45 years.
That's amazing. And I love that you actually brought up the behavioral side of it, because that's exactly where it's all going. We all want to know why people do things. Why do people love a brand? How can we get them more interested? And it's more about the consumer these days, and that's also where it's going, than it is about the product trying to sell.
And just, Gordon, if I can, just interestingly, when I was at university 30 odd years ago, the consumer behavior, the discipline, sat within psychology, not within the business faculty, which is quite interesting. So now, I serve on 2 university boards. I kind of do a little bit of part-time facilitation, etc. And as recently as last week, I asked the head of the faculty of the one university, I said, Nadil, just tell me, where does it sit these days? And she said, no, years ago, they corrected that. And they'd moved consumer behavior, why people do this, what do they do and why do they do it, into the marketing faculty under business. But again, you can argue it's a crossover, it's an understanding, Gordon, of psychology and of late, the behavioral science or behavioral economics, and we can touch on that. But I mean, the principle hasn't changed, from the start of whenever the start was, making something or offering a service, enticing somebody, finding out if they need that, and then wrapping it up that they can do it. But I mean, interestingly, that the two, I just happened to, my setup was such that I did subjects in both fields. But I always wonder whether somebody chose and didn't do consumer behavior and yet qualified as a marketer. Quite interesting.
That is interesting, and I'm glad they corrected that, because I did marketing at varsity as well, and we didn't have the psychology part of it, which is interesting. And now that you mention it,
yeah, it is, and it's encouraging that at least from an academic base point of view, what now looks like, and many times things look like common sense after the fact, because everyone's clever after the fact. But I mean, the point is at least now it's corrected. So hopefully young people coming through. And, as part of some curriculum design now, young people coming through have that understanding that marketing isn't about making something, putting a bow around it in a laboratory. You've got to drop that into the actual real world. And you better understand, do people want that thing, need that thing? How does it look? What do they do? And so on and so on. And so you need that bridging device.
100% agree with that. So then I also want to know, what part of the discipline do you enjoy the most? Because like you were saying earlier, there's so much that goes into that end result. But what part of the process do you find the most enjoyable?
I think from my side, I enjoy the execution part. In other words, the overt communications part the most. So in other words, whatever shape or form that may take, whether it takes the form these days of a social post, or whether it takes the form of a long-form television commercial in certain markets where that exists. Ironically, Gordon and I are discussing the other day about, traditional media versus what we'd call new media, but in time won't be new media. So I still like the overt visual part, but obviously having worked in many organizations, you do appreciate the bits that go in behind it before that. Otherwise, you rush to the answer. And I guess the earlier days, I'd always like to spend time at the agency, rush to the answer, do the flash Harry stuff. But you need to do the basics. And, we may chat behavioral economics a little bit later, but those are the fundamentals these days that unless you have that proper base, you could end up communicating because you like it, which is exactly often the wrong reason why, people do things, Gordon. People buy into, they drink their own Kool-Aid, they buy into their own campaign, and they love it. And then everyone must love it until the research comes out and anyway.
I'm sure both of you have sat in boardrooms and there's like 10 people in there and everyone's just like, this is amazing. This is what we're going to do. And you just kind of have to take this step. It's like, have we done any kind of research? Just have some insight. Is this actually true for the people we actually want to reach? Because to your point, we all drink our own Kool-Aid and think it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, I
Of
mean,
course, our work is amazing.
yeah, it is. Yeah. People in the boardroom who like your work, for me, is actually problematic. I, as a benchmark, would want at least one person to be nauseated by it, because if if two people in business constantly agree on everything, one of them is obsolete. So you want to annoy at least one person out of 10. I don't think you can get by. But for me, I approach marketing always from the media angle. That's my lens. That's where I've been. And as a discipline, what I enjoy is that it's multifaceted. So when I was a child, I was always fascinated by things called paint by numbers. You've got a little piece of paper with numbers, and if you put the right colors on the piece of paper, then you ended up with the Sistine Chapel, which is kind of interesting. And I think now media is very research driven, and we're just churning out millions and millions of bits of data and big data. Which in and of itself is incredibly dull. But if you apply a creative interpretation to the numbers, you can end up looking at a spreadsheet and recognize that it's the Sistine Chapel. So it's that kind of intrigue for me that I enjoy. I love the multifaceted nature where numbers are not literal. I mean, media, when I came into the business, 1 and 1 equals 2. Then, all right, well, that's okay. It's rather dull. But if I discount and I do things properly, then 1 and 1 might equal 3. But I think more and more we're in the business of 1 and 1 equals magic, and that's the beautiful part.
Yes.
The 1 and the 1, the disciplines have to be mastered numerically, but the magic comes from wherever it comes from.
I love that analogy, actually. And I remember paint by numbers. As a child, I did them often. I thought I was such an artist. And you realize, no.
And that is why, some of the worst artists in the world inflict their art upon us, because their mothers put their paint by numbers on the fridge and led them to conclude that they were marvelously creative. So, folks out, please do not put stuff on fridges with fridge magnets. It leads to utter despair down the line.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, look, I wonder if there's any parents out there who has the heart to tell their child, no, this is going in the bin.
Yeah, but I think just adding, Gordon, to your point about data and whatever shape it takes, whether it's a spreadsheet or a research paper, and there's a whole lot of it. It's not about collecting the data. It's the application and the use of the data. You know what I mean? And so often you look at it, and I guess that's a skill that comes through training and experience and perhaps knowing what to look for, as you say, because life isn't as simple as just painting by numbers these days. There's a lot of another lens of experience and expertise that comes in. And that's why, many people think they're marketers because they bought a pair of sneakers and a pair of jeans, and they think it's as simple as that. Whereas if you look at, Gordon, what you're saying, if you have data and real data, but you actually make the effort to understand the data, because I've also worked in organizations where we were collectors of data, but we were just too lazy to work through the data. But we always felt better because we had a thick report, but the work came in. The sort of grind came in going through the work, not the exec summary, going through the work and then coming out with an outcome. What are you going to do with this report, with this set of data? So yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you say now, hopefully a lot of modern day marketers, if you look at the intersection of modern day marketers, of data and big data and science and behavioral economics and psychology and all of those things, there's lots of things on the go. But hopefully now they've taken all of that into a melting pot and can use it for the better, otherwise don't do the exercise. Otherwise you end up being a collector.
Yeah.
100%. And I think so many organizations are collectors still. And I think part of that problem is you need to know what you want solved. What's that question you want to solve? And I think a lot of brands also struggle with what am I actually looking for in the data? Mm-hmm. And that's also the good starting point right there.
Just on the point of questions, what's the question that needs to be answered? Again, for me, is part of the equation. That's the 1 + 1 = 2. If you want to do the 1 + 1 = magic, then you've got to start interrogating, are you asking the right question? And I think we need to spend more time looking at the question itself and say, okay, this is perhaps the wrong question. That was a good question 10 years ago. It's not a good question anymore. And I think that's not enough time is spent on articulating or formulating the questions. We're spending too much time trying to come up with the correct answer to a given question. So I think, for me, And if there are, sort of younger listeners, viewers, it's if you really speak to my wife. I've been with the same woman for 52 years now. Okay, so it's very difficult to keep her entertained, and I do the same things every day, so I get bored and unmanageable. So I need to know that if I go and do something, I'm going to come back out energized, interested, and alert, because I'm going to have to, keep her interested and alert in me as well. So it cannot. I think every day when I get it, I thank, my creator that I'm not a proctologist, because my worldview needs to change. I cannot look at the world through the same lens every day. And that's the beautiful thing about media. If you want the lens to change, join media.
That's actually very true. And I love that we have to interrogate what those questions are to get the different answers to actually solve the right problem. So I absolutely agree with that.
I think the other side, though, Gordon and not everybody, and I think your point, Gordon, is valid as maybe as harsh as it sounds to the 5-year-old with a colouring in on the fridge. In adult life, too, that is true. In other words, not everybody is a marketing magician. Now, just because you've got the job and you've got the accolades and your parents or your spouse tells you that doesn't make it so. And so often you need to have that honest view, and it's a tough one because once you've reached that CMO exec type level, you should have acquired the skills and all the rest of it. But what you're talking about, Gordon, is that stardust, that little bit of extra. You take two people, they can have whether it's the same set of data, they can look at the same event, they can do whatever they want to do, and yet the one just constantly outperforms the other because there's some other thing, whether it's the ability to bring the team together. And I say the internal and the external team, bringing the creative guys in, bringing the digital guys, the old school, what I'd call old school PR, today's transformed, the media guys, that little bit of magic. Sometimes it's at half a question that you've asked or that seed that you've planted, but you must have the innate ability to do that, because otherwise you'll be an okay, maybe sometimes a good CMO, but you're not going to ever be the top of the pops in my view. And again, you see that, and it's almost one of those, it's like that magic factor, Gordon, you see on a sports field. Somebody's just got that X factor, and they just somewhere, when you least expect it, they pulled something out of the bag and you say, wow, I can't believe they did it. And the same is true in business, and often it's those margins. You need that marginal gain to make the difference.
I agree with you. I think some people just have an innate ability to see things differently to other people, and they make amazing marketers.
Yeah. But just to come back to your rugby analogy, and I think the beautiful thing about rugby is there's room for everybody. I'm an old front row forward. Quite frankly, the prospect of running 50 meters down the try line and scoring a try is nauseating. It's not my job. And
just running in general for me.
Bashing into people, was more my thing. But that's the beautiful thing about advertising. There's a role for everybody. Not everybody's got the magic. I can count on one hand the magical people. I've had the privilege of working with people like Robin Putter, the late F.K. Muller, who was my mentor. These guys had an ability to see way beyond my own understanding. But that doesn't diminish what I do. I know, and particularly in media, we've always been children of a lesser God. I know that. It's all about the creative, and that's okay. So, just be best in class, even if maybe you're in the B class, that's okay. That doesn't diminish the fact that you came first in the B class.
Yeah, absolutely. But Gordon, it's, and if I look at media now, and I make this debate, you guys spend all the money, so it's not children of a lesser God. In fact, that's where all
your money, Doug. That's the best part about it.
And again, the thing is, your speciality would be the media strategist, the media planner, the media director, the media whatever. But where the value sits is if you can look up and you can scan that field, and you've got an ability not to go and do the creative necessarily, but have a view on it, provided the culture's right. In other words, that's what I'm saying about these big campaigns. You're managing egos a lot of the time because the ECD is the ECD. He's not going to be told by the media guy how to make the campaign. That I can tell you. And so as the client, though, it's a question of bringing everybody in, creating that safety net that you allow people, but it's got to be skills based. No, you can't just start shouting because you got an opinion. I need to know that when you say something, it's based on something, a track record, history, a success rate, something. But then I'll say, but Gordon, what is your view on this? Your primary job is to scrum. It's not to take the drop kick. So I'm not going to ask you to take the drop kick, but I'm going to ask you a view. You may just give me one snippet of saying, but in this play, I looked up, there was a slight gap. Do you think you could do that? You know what I mean? But you can't do it, because otherwise it becomes opinion based. Everybody starts shouting about things. And that's often the criticism of marketing, is people start saying, well, it's just an opinion. But I'm saying you've got to find the science. But the great part of encouraging that magic is to ask people to just have an educated view on something else. It isn't their core skill. But if they can give me that 0.5%, that's often the gain you need. That's often the difference.
Even I've managed to annoy pretty much every generation of students that I've lectured for the last 50 odd years. It's my instinct as a school teacher initially, but is to start my lectures by saying, in this class, you're not entitled to your own opinion. What you are entitled to is your own informed opinion. And in media and advertising, the difference between an opinion and an informed opinion is called margin. Okay, if you have an informed opinion, you can charge more for it. It's not just a nice to have, it is an actual value-based commodity. So stay informed. And coming back to my earlier point, every day is an opening night. You got to start again. There's something new, and if you always believe that you're going to learn something new tomorrow, you will never be afraid to share what you know today. It's just that simple.
Absolutely. So let's talk influencer marketing. And I'm quite curious to know, when did you first become aware of this thing called influencer marketing? Maybe you were on your social media, somewhere on a Twitter or Facebook, and you saw an influencer talk about something and you thought, geez, this is not just someone talking about a brand. This is kind of marketing. And what kind of format was that? What was your initial thoughts on it? Doc, let's start with you.
I think, I don't look at the narrower definition, perhaps, of influencer marketing being largely in the digital, online, social media type field. I look back at, what is an influencer? A person who's done something, or a place or an event that has done something to influence me to think about things differently. Now, it didn't always create a change of behavior. So let me give you a few examples. I mean, just as a young person growing up, even before television, certainly long before the internet and social media. But the point of the story is your exposure would be things like cinema, newspapers, outdoor, that type of thing. And I mean, those old Peter Stuyvesant ads of the iconic ads of the 80s, they never changed my behavior to smoke. So in that sense, they failed to transform me as a young adult coming through the system. But I'll tell you what it did do, is it made me want to find out where's Tahiti. Because good-looking people were doing fantastic things in this place called Tahiti. And then they were snow skiing in the Alps. And so it grew a love for me of travel and of looking at the world. And then again, Gordon and I did an episode a few weeks back on James Bond and a museum that was up in the mountains in Austria. And the point with that as well is James Bond was an influencer for me growing up. Gordon, I'd go, those days we'd queue up. It was the cinema, the holiday season, the July holidays or December holidays, whatever. And my James Bond, whichever era you grew up with, was Roger Moore. So I would not mimic his behavior, but I also wanted the cool gadgets in the car. And certainly James Bond has changed through the years, and we understand that. But those were the things. Then later on, as an adult, a lot of people who follow sport will remember some iconic images, one of which was Jonty Rhodes diving in the 92 World Cup, Gordon. That image sparked a lot of kids that you'd hear them, saying, I'm fielding like Jonty, I'm Jonty, no, I'm Jonty. And the point is, that wasn't social media fed. That was a guy trying to run out another guy, the game against Pakistan. And the point of the story is, those are the heroes that people grow up with, and they become influencers. And today, I mean, obviously there are a lot of modern day examples, whether it's scripted reality TV, big names, A-listers, and we can go on to it. So I think my first thing was, I guess in the world of an isolated South Africa, magazine heroes, and yeah, the movies, the cinema. Certainly, a character like James Bond would be an influencer for me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would start with movies as well. But just to comment on the John T. Rhodes thing, the guy who ran it was Inzamam Al Hook, which goes to show that when you're in media, maintaining, or retaining bits of utterly useless information will eventually pay off. So, but coming back to the cinema, for me as a kid, the very first influencer for me was James Bond driving an Aston Martin. I mean, I'd never even seen an Aston Martin until I saw those movies. So it was really embedded in my consciousness that was the car to drive. I mean, to this day, I still lie awake at night perspiring intensely at the sight of James Bond driving a Toyota, and you only live twice. I mean, I haven't really recovered from that. So, Bond for me was the influencer. But what I love about that is it's gone beyond that sort of initial cinema. So now we have Bond the influencer with Heineken Zero, which has embraced all the other platforms. And it's not uncool, to go out and have a Heineken Zero. Even on my rugby group, the guys will occasionally allow you to have one. If you have more than one, you might be in trouble. But I love the evolution of the Bond influencer, because it's really up to date now. And it would be for me, if I want to have a few beers, but I have to drive home these days, that's my number one default. I'm just going to get a pack of Heineken Zeros, and I don't feel like I've compromised my macho image at the rugby bar.
No, and I think all those examples were amazing. And I remember those Peter Stuyvesant ads, and those guys were just so cool. Yeah. Just like that cool factor just dripped from them. Yeah. But to your point, the evolution of influencer marketing, it didn't have a name back then, but we were all influenced by someone, or someone we found iconic. And the John T. Example was so poignant as well. I think I was in primary school when that happened. Yeah. And I saw, when you said that, I conjured that image up in my mind. And everyone knew who he was, and he was this amazing hero. So I think that evolution of, we didn't really have a name for it. And back then, brands would kind of attach themselves to these iconic heroes, whether they were celebrities, sportsmen, and they would give them a bit of their product, or they want to use it, and they put them in ad campaigns and billboards. And that was that association of influence marketing. My hero is drinking this drink, I'm going to drink it too, like James Bond. Yeah. And now these days, we just have a name for it. And we've got all these different iterations of it, whether it's a nano influencer like you guys and me, just talking to people about things we're really passionate about, whether it is the reality stars, whether it's someone that's just got a really good gift at taking beautiful videos and pictures on Instagram. That's all that iteration. That's now, I suppose, people have an access to a world of peers these days to be influenced with.
Yeah, and I think you've talked about some of those brands, and going back to the 80s for me, Pepsi was at the forefront of that kind of personality endorsement. So influencers there in the initial phase were these superstars, Michael Jackson, Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, all those guys were in a different kind of league. I think what's interesting now is, as you say, there are nano influencers, micro influencers. You don't have to be Michael Jackson to have an impact somewhere in a marketing campaign, which I think is really intriguing now. But Pepsi for me was iconic in those days. I mean, Back to the Future, 1985, I think that was, Marty McFly, couldn't find a Coke. It was all Pepsi. Yeah. So it was so cleverly embedded into product placement, the influences and the mixing of real life characters like Shaquille O'Neal with a Marty McFly in the movie series. Fabulous. Pepsi had the privilege of working on Pepsi when they came into South Africa in the 90s, and it was just incredible to see how that culture was embedded in the thought process. Really innovative.
And I think that brings it back to the behavioral sciences, right?
Absolutely.
We're not only influenced by celebrities or sports stars and movies, we're also influenced by niche experts who's just sharing their expertise on social media or in real life. And we're also very much influenced by people we see every day, our family, our friends. We really value their opinions. And I think that's where it's all going. It's saying, if I want to upgrade my phone, I'm going straight to people I know and I'm very close friends with a tech journalist. She's usually the first person I DM. I'm like, I want a new phone. Which ones do you recommend? And I usually go with a recommendation, which makes her that niche expert. But I'll also ask my family, what experience have I had with this brand?
Yeah.
So it's all very much evolutionary, and
Yeah.
I love it. I love this industry.
And I think it's an aggregation. If you look at, you're talking about, people who don't walk around with the title saying an influencer. They just your family or your friends or whatever the case. But you go to them because they've got a specific sort of ability. So for argument's sake, if you look at some of the reality TV programs that are slightly educational, or you can get something out of them, things like the cooking programs, MasterChef or My Kitchen Rules or whatever the case may be. Now, I'm not a great watcher of those particular programs, but I can at least accept the fact that there's a skill, there's a recipe sharing, there's something, and then there's invariably from the television a pull down into digital. I can my dwell time's different. I can pull down and do stuff. So that's that to me is quite a valuable way of sharing info. As is booking sites. If I look at aggregator sites, if I want to book a hotel, I'd probably go into TripAdvisor or booking.com or something. I don't always necessarily choose what is there, but at least I give myself the chance of looking at it. And like, I guess many people, but certainly I do, I want to buy the messenger before the message. So do I believe these people? Who are these people? No, I don't know them. I just look at, if you've got 3 reviews versus 300, excuse me, in terms of volume, I want to look at the quality, what type of, you know what I mean, and so on and so on. So at least now I have the opportunity to be immersed in a world of many different opinions, where it's not just George Clooney standing on the shores of Lake Como saying buy an espresso, which is an amazing thing, because I would never have thought. I'd be very curious to have seen that pitch, Gordon. Imagine you in Nespresso and you pitching to George Clooney, who doesn't really need the money, is standing on the side of the thing, and the ads aren't bad. But I mean, the point of the story is, and the influencer, why do it? You know what I mean? Like any of these A-grade guys, why did you do it? So it'll be interesting. But I mean, the point I'm making, and you make, is the influence is all around us. It's just a question of how we absorb it and use it.
I think it's the super influences that we are more sort of conscious of. But I was just kind of reflect in our discussion on, some of the lesser lights, I mean, Dr. Tim Noakes, he's done more for meat consumption than Tyrannosaurus Rex did. I mean, it's like unbelievable. But to the best of my knowledge, he's not being specifically financed by anybody. So it intrigues me that one person who is not in the limelight, so to speak, can have the massive impact he's had on dietary practices. But I think that to a large degree is the mobility of the mobile phone. So in the past, I had to be in the cinema to be influenced, or I had to be watching television. Now I can just be sitting in a quiet moment, deciding in a restaurant whether to buy a big, fat blueberry muffin or a vegan, horrible, skinny thing. I mean, so it's appalling. He's actually ruined my entire sort of spontaneous reaction to food. Sorry on you.
That's hilarious.
Please.
And there you have it. That was episode 1. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this. And tune in the next couple of weeks to see episode 2.